So we're going.
All right.
We can check levels and shit like that.
Yeah, we can check levels for a minute. And the good thing is I can always go in and cut the first couple of minutes. So it's super easy.
They can do that these days. You can cut
It's
stuff.
fancy. It's weird. Technology.
We can take something that is and make it not.
Okay, so our cutting off point, I will just jump straight in with question and we'll roll from there. Okay, so Emile, I'm going to jump in with a question that I shot you a little while ago that kind of sparked the start of an interesting conversation that we had. And I think that we're going to need to give a little bit of a background to lead people into that conversation. But the question that I asked you had to do with a video that's been going around on social media where Sacha Baron Cohen put out some of his opinions about Facebook and some of the information that they allow out onto their platform, and some of the things that he kind of wants people to, or that some of the actions that he wants Facebook to take. And I saw some
or the government to make Facebook take.
Okay, so that's for the government,
our representatives
to force Facebook to take. Yeah. And I saw some parallels there, I thought, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that as well. And I just think that before we kind of jump off into that, we'll maybe give a little introduction into what we mean by that question. So the parallel that I saw there, and I think you agree with me so far on the parallel, is having to do with Hayek's information problem that he points out, related to central decision-making versus what could maybe be called decentralized decision-making or dispersed information decision-making. And I think that there's an analogy to be drawn there, because at the root, both circumstances have to do with information problems. Okay? So before we kind of back up and make the analogy with Facebook and what he is asking, like you said, not only Facebook, but the government to be forcing Facebook to do. And I think probably my basic question is it even possible or efficient for them to do this? Let's see if we can explain what the analogy is. Okay. And so this is the way I would put that, is that if you, when you have a centrally planned economy, and maybe I'll back up a little bit more than that. Economies in general, the reason for the discipline of economics is that we have scarce resources that we have to allocate. We have limited resources that we have to allocate. And then just the fact that resources are scarce, or just the fact that resources exist, doesn't tell us what use they will be put to. So we have to make decisions about not only their scarcity, the lack of them being infinite, but that we also have to make decisions about what end we will put them to. Okay, and so different ways of organizing economies have to do with what will we do with those resources, and what specific ways will we allocate and use resources. And there's a couple of, you could envision kind of a continuum. On one end of the continuum being like a command-based economy, on another end of a continuum, a market-based economy. And a command-based economy is allocating those resources from in a central decision-making process. Right? And a market-based economy is allocating those resources in a decentralized way.
That's right.
Okay. And so another way that I envision that a lot of times is a push force versus a pull force. So a central decision-making body or group of bodies would be attempting to push resources out to their end users. And a market-based system would be pulling resources to their most valued end through the market mechanisms. Okay? And so what Hayek pointed out, or at least the way I understand it, pointed out was that there's an information problem being solved there or being addressed there. And so where resources are needed, that's an information question, right? And so if I'm a central decision maker, I'm trying to solve that information problem. I'm trying to know all the information that is needed to understand where do these resources need to go, when do they need to get there, what quantities do they need to get there. And he basically said there's a problem in trying to do that from a central location because you lack the amount of information, the right information, whereas dispersed knowledge of all of the users, the nodes of the system, if you will, have more pertinent and more relevant information in real time to make those decisions in a better way. And so that was kind of the analogy that I thought worked for the situation with Facebook with ideas. So are they even equipped to make those types of decisions from a central location? Could the government say, we can make all these dispersed decisions about what types of information, not even regarding the other questions of like free speech and that kind of stuff, but are they even equipped to do that in an efficient fashion, in a useful fashion, anything like that? So I guess maybe that's enough of an introduction to that idea. Do you think that I've fairly explained the economic point?
Yeah. That was a fair intro. Not only to my little view on one little edit, I'd say, is to me, and this is being influenced by Peter Boetke at George Mason University and people like this and some of his colleagues. For me, economics isn't about efficient resource allocation or efficiency maximization. It's about exchange, right, and understanding the very complex social order that comes with that. But having said that, certainly it is true that markets are much less inefficient. You could say even more efficient than a planned economy. And one of the reasons, clearly, because of that, or the reason why, is, as you said, when you have, let's say, billions of people in a global economy, each having their own dispersed, tacit knowledge, decentralized knowledge, and knowledge of their own ends, things that they want, things that they might be willing to trade resources for, property, money, and the fact that their ends change all the time, right? I don't even know how I'm going to end this particular sentence. Yeah, you know what I mean? Right. So the arguments for command economy comes, well, there've been different shades of them, but assuming that that a centralized decision maker, and Hayek brings this up not only in The Use of Knowledge in Society, his paper, I think first published in 1945, but also his book The Fatal Conceit, which is a great book also. He argues that the centralized decision maker would have to be getting feedback from all the people within an economy in real time, right? So he can know where to allocate it next, right? But again, people's ends change all the time, right?
So why don't just read and me as a pedestrian economist, to me that just is like you already have to have that information from the people on the ground. So if it's a command structure...
Wait, who already has it?
Well, so if it is a command structure, as we're talking about that term, to make that decision, apart from math or politics, you still need that guy on the ground to say, hey, like, how many bags of rice are we really putting out? To fabricate your lie, even, you still need to talk to them. So the point is, they are the source of the information, right?
The people on the ground.
Why rise above, keep as close to that metric for your decision making, right? Because that's where the information lies, as opposed to going up. Because then you're just transferring information. Like, we know how the telephone game works. You lose information by the time you get all the way around. Anyway, that's my little. I read
different people have tried different versions of this. Mao's Great Leap Forward and so on, and with any in the Soviet Union they had the Gauss plan, right? So you had at the top you had the head of the Soviet Union, and then you had people that were supposed to act on and be somehow knowledgeable of how many blue jeans were needed to be made that year,
right?
And how many cars, right? And of course, you got blue jeans that didn't fit, and you had one type of car, right? and of course, blue jeans were widely sold. American-made blue jeans were widely sold in the Soviet Union because people preferred choice and market economies in just next door to Soviet former Soviet countries. They could be bought and then sold into the East.
And from what I read, that was after an attempt for the government in the Soviet Union to try to reproduce American jeans. I read this recently.
Well, I know they were making jeans.
They're like, let's try to. Yeah, right.
They were like
It didn't hold up because they didn't have to compete against someone else making better jeans. Yeah. So no one bought them.
Yeah. Or they'd have so many nails that they were supposed to get out, so they'd have nails that were just I forgot, it was too small or too large, but they were just supposed to increase output, and they were just mass producing X amount of nails, and they can say, I hit my quota, right? The factory manager, I hit my quota, right? Where market economies, you're driven by the whims of consumers, right? So you can overproduce or you can underproduce. That happens all the time because even people in let's say a spread out, a dispersed market, right? With lots of little factories taking inputs as they can find them, little profit opportunities come up here and there. Some of them cyclical, some of them more long term. But they ultimately production has to be led towards consumption, right? Yep. And whether you, maybe I don't want to get into capital structure, but whether you're extracting raw materials out of mines or you're taking final goods and just putting a brand name on it and then a package and sold, ultimately all of this, the whole capital structure has to be driven towards consumers. And if consumers change their mind, then you've got products just sitting sitting on shelves, right? And nobody, running a business at a loss is no way to stay in business. Right?
Yeah. I'll give you another kind of concrete example on that before we jump back to kind of the analogy that we were talking about. This is one I use in class periodically. So a friend of all of ours worked welding tanks in Williston, North Dakota, whenever they had the oil boom up there. And a few years ago, I can't remember what year it was exactly, but he was telling me that plywood was selling for some astronomical price up there. And the reason was it was in incredibly high demand to build huts for people to live in, because there was basically nowhere for people to live because there were so many workers coming up needing temporary housing. And so plywood was being, again, pulled, to use my analogy of the force that is moving the resources through channels in the economy, not because there was a central director of plywood deciding that X amount of plywood needed to go there. And so, and this is making the point of efficiency. How do we know that plywood is more dearly desired in Williston, North Dakota? Because they're willing to pay a higher price to pull it up there, right? And how do we know, like you said, that the demand has dried up? They're no longer willing to pay that price, right? And after the boom stops, maybe it's in more demand where a hurricane has happened or something like that, or maybe it's not in an excess of demand in any particular geographic region in the country at that moment. And so the prices kind of level back out to what we would call a norm or whatever. So that's just one example of how different resources get pulled around. Labor gets pulled around like that to different jobs, to different geographic regions, things like that. So the idea of trying to solve these informational problems, when I was thinking about, how could social media do that, and asking you about that, you raised some other kind of interesting thoughts related to that. One of them having to do with competition of ideas too. So I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that as well. And I'm trying to remember exactly how you moved into that, because, and I'll let you kind of think about that as I raise one of the problems I thought of with if you had central decision makers trying to make all of these judgment calls, essentially, about, and we aren't even touching on what's right and not right to do as far as not allowing people to have a certain platform or whatever. But, how would you even know, who can say this is a serious statement versus a non-serious statement or whatever? Is that a useful way to use resources? What if I go post on a social media platform, I swear the next time I get stuck in traffic, I'm going to ram somebody with my car, both of you just smirked whenever I said that. Why? Because you basically know I'm joking, right? Like, all my friends know I'm joking. They know that's a dry humor expression of frustration, right? Is that an overt threat? No, it's not an overt threat. How do we solve all of that? Is that an efficient way do we hire some bureaucrat to run around, searching for phrases like, gonna take an axe to somebody's car, and be like, oh, that's the person who can't talk anymore, or whose offensive speech, this person's offensive speech may be this person's theology, for all I know. I mean, it's very hard to start drawing those lines, and it's at the least a very inefficient way to start trying to police information and platforms. So why not? And I think this was the question that I posed to you. I said I hope that bad ideas die in the light of day. I hope that if we can expose them and have them compete with one another. So now, to get away from just me saying sarcastic things like I'm going to ram somebody with my car in traffic, but let's say I have some bad theory, like the Holocaust never happened, or some other crazy bad theory.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead and postulate that and get your evidence out there and let somebody argue with you and look like a fool.
What is the evidence that stifling is a good tactic to deal with something that you deem, and who is you? Like, this is the discussion I've had with a couple people lately, is if at all we start touching compelled speech, or like messing it all with the First Amendment, it's isn't that who makes the decisions on which speech is proper and which speech is improper?
Who do we trust?
And maybe it's somebody that you trust right now, but if we also still have a system where the president or the executive branch changes and the structure of power every 4 years can change, then we are allowing that group of people, which 50% of the country roughly does not completely agree with, to tell us what we can and can't say.
Exactly.
Possibly.
When I watched,
and why would you give anyone that power?
Well,
that's it's outrageous.
I
to me.
I agree.
It's silly. It's just silly.
And on that point, when I watched Sacha Baron Cohen's presentation to the Anti-Defamation League, I couldn't help but think he kept saying, our elected representatives, and we as a democracy, blah blah blah, and he means clearly Congress, but you know he didn't hesitate to say what a buffoon Trump was, and I agree with him. Trump's a buffoon, clearly, but you know, presidents tend to set agendas, right? So on one hand, he's saying the people at the top who, with a Twitter microphone say all sort of buffoonish things that are factually incorrect, and he'd be right at that. But why is it that he thinks that the Congress who would act benevolently, and why does he think that he can trust them to shut down the president, who many of these Congress people follow the agenda of the president? Right. It seems so short term, and it seems so contradictory that he does and doesn't trust the halls of power at the same time. Right. Or he thinks just the good guys will, the ones that have his ends in mind, will do what he wants them to do, but none of the stuff he doesn't want them to do. This is so silly.
It's like the herky jerky nature of the structure that we have keeps the boat from not going off the cliff or whatever. But it also disallows, it doesn't streamline progress either. So it seems like it's a, you know, it's a problem. It's a dilemma.
I think it might have been Jonathan Haidt, who, I don't remember if he was saying that this is what science is supposed to be, or if this is what the academy is supposed to be, the universities. But either way, he summarized either science or the academy under a term. Maybe he got it from someone else, but it was the first I'd heard of it. Is institutional disconfirmation, right? And he was arguing. He was showing all kinds of data saying that universities tend to be left of center. You know, the sociology department and anthropology way over here, and the far right ones are actually moderate Democrats in business schools, right? And he wasn't saying. He said it was some conversation he was having with, I think it was Jordan Peterson. And he says, now when I say this, people say, what are you saying, that we need neo-Nazis? He said, no. He said, clearly we don't. What we need is people saying, but guys, right, so climate change might be a real thing, and it might be the fact that indeed humans are a primary cause of it, but maybe the way in which you're setting out to deal with that particular problem doesn't achieve your own ends, or everything comes in trade-offs. Maybe you're getting more of the negative than you might be able to achieve. Right? That kind of thing. Yep. And when you have again, you want institutional disconfirmation. Yes. Not only in the academy, but really in life. We want anti-fragile human beings that there's a. Do you click clickbait? Clearly someone does, because they're on web pages. It works. I don't click.
It must work.
Well, okay, exactly. Yeah. But most people recognize, okay, somebody's grandma. I think it's just a bunch of grandmas that are clicking clickbait, right? Enough grandmas to feed the clickbait engine, right? Yeah. But people will become sterilized to this. They see it and they're like, okay, well, clearly that's going to bring me nowhere. Right. That's going to be into a website that says I have a computer virus, but in fact it's giving me a computer virus, so I won't click it, right? Mm-hmm. People recognize it, right? Yeah. And that's because in life, if you're around people offering you this, offering you that, haggling, that kind of stuff, you tend to be better at saying no to the things that would lead you to trouble, right? So yeah.
So that actually, I'm glad that you used a couple of the words that you just used, because disconfirmation is incredibly important, and it's been so. Maybe if I think about it while I'm talking, I'll come up with. I'll remind myself. It's been a while since I've read Anti-Fragile, even though it's one of my favorite books.
Yeah, it's a great book. Nicholas Taleb.
Yeah. Taleb's one of my favorite authors for a number of different reasons, but it's. And somewhere I was on a thread and somebody said you should read Anti-Fragile every year. I definitely don't do that, but but it is a good book, and it's been a while since I've read it. Maybe I should make that my New Year's resolution. Anyway, disconfirmation, though, really, really important. And as I do so often, I'm going to make jiu-jitsu analogies to that, and jiu-jitsu, mixed martial arts in general with that, okay? So if you have a theory in the martial arts world, you can now, there's an environment now where you can test that theory. Okay, you can confirm or disconfirm the efficacy of what you're saying or what you think is the case. Whether it's overall the case, this is a better way of fighting in general, or applying a certain move. You're welcome to say, I have a better way of doing this choke. I have a more efficient way of applying this lock. I know how to train people in striking in a better way. You're welcome to say that, but all of the talking doesn't really matter if it can be disconfirmed in the environments that we have to test it.
Back to competition.
Yeah. So competition, without the competition,
Yes.
If you don't allow competition, and you say, no, we can't do that because for whatever reason, we won't allow that clash of ideas, the testing of ideas, because we can't stand the results of the disconfirmation. We can't stomach the outcome of disconfirmation because we won't tolerate that. Then what we're saying is that we're okay in the end. That's the intolerance of tolerance, or excessive tolerance, is that you're actually saying that you're okay with everything. That you're so against that disconfirmation that you don't care about truth. You don't care about progress. You don't actually care. And so if that analogy that you were talking about earlier was towards the academic world, then you're not making any progress towards more true ideas or testing whether or not something is aligned with reality in any way, because you're not okay with a competition of ideas.
So,
Yeah.
So on one hand, it would be incorrect, I think, to say that we shouldn't trust authorities, right? I clearly, if I go to a doctor, medical doctor, given that it's not my field, it's a heuristic, it's a shortcut to say he has a degree in X, so I'll defer to the fact that I indeed have the disease that he says I have.
Right.
But it's okay. It's okay for that. We do that all the time, right? But we also know that even the doctor is not infallible. So we can get second opinions. We can also know, if we're critical thinkers, we can also know that although he's saying that this particular medicine that he's prescribing to me might in fact fix me, he's just like everyone else from the same pool of human beings, and maybe he's prescribing this particular medicine because maybe they're paying him, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's still a good medicine, but just know that he operates under the same incentive structures as the rest of us.
That's right.
Right. Just that. Or I was going to say. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So the point you just made is absolutely true. We can't know everything, right? So we do have to operate under those heuristics. But the point of disconfirmation is very important, and I think that kind of harkens back to the first thing that we brought up, which is the whole social media idea of, like, if we start getting rid of things, then I wonder, are we not allowing, and like I said in my first message to you in our conversation, I hope that under the light of day, that bad ideas go away, that the worst ideas get seen as the worst ideas. I hope I'm not being overly optimistic in that regard. I try not to be too pessimistic in that regard. But with enough light of day and time and that sort of thing, those things can go away. And I don't think that you have to have complete trust in all authorities to do that. I think that you can, like you said, operate with those intellectual shortcuts, which are heuristics, and then at the same time exercise critical thinking and recognize that everyone is fallible to some degree, without going in and starting to say, well, let's create an agency whose job it is to go and silence people who we being, as you said, whoever we happens to be at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Hamas was democratically elected. Hitler was. Trump was. Fill in the blank. Okay, I'm sure. Maybe he's right. I don't. Not my forte, but he did mention Russian meddling in the American elections. But Trump did come about. Through democratic means.
And there's a lot of people that don't like the ideas that are put forth by every single administration, and so why would you give more power for them to make half of the population super unhappy by disallowing them to say certain things? And who knows, like, I'm sure there's terrible things to say that I wish people didn't say. That's not the point, and I feel like that's the argument that keeps getting made, and at least that I've had, is, well, what do you want? You want people to be able to say this or that? And I'm like, that's a terrible thing to say. I'm not arguing whether that's a good or bad thing to say.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm arguing that I don't want anybody telling me what I should or should not say. That is the most fundamental right we have, and I hope that bad ideas, and you guys are articulating this in a different way than I can, but that bad ideas will be flushed out by unless we believe that our whole society is bad. We're going to choose, but that's not a good direction to go, even if it is, because then who knows better?
It's interesting to note. A lot of people that say, it doesn't seem like we have the capacity for reason, right? If you say such a statement, you've already self-defeated, right? Because if you say we don't have the capacity for reason, clearly you think that at least you have the capacity for reason, and you think that the listener has the capacity to understand what you said, right? Maybe he'll agree or not, but you wouldn't bother to argue if you didn't think that this other person has the capacity for reason. So you think that at least two people have the capacity for reason, right? So it's a bit self-defeating.
Yeah, that also kind of makes me think of a little bit of that might point out a little bit of circular reasoning in some of the benevolent view that and I'm not saying this is 100% wrong, but I know that there are some there's always some segment of society, and I think that Soul wrote about this when he was saying that intellectuals are always tempted to think that they will know better how to tell other people what to do, right? And so we can set things up so that you'll do the right thing, so that you'll act in your own interest, so that you'll do what you're supposed to do. And that, again, kind of smacks of this same thing that we're talking about, of, we, again, who's we? But if only everyone would just give me and my types the power to push you and your types toward what you and your types are supposed to be doing. Because you're so irrational, me and my rational buddies will tell you how to be rational, and we'll push you over that way so that you'll do what you're supposed to do. Well, doesn't that assume that there's enough rationality out there in the right sorts of people, and don't the right sorts of people always turn out to be me and my pals, the people who think about like me, right? But what happens when it turns and it's the other people and you've created the power for them to push
what
people
happens
in that
is you
direction.
don't want them being able to tell you what you can say or can't say.
Then all of a sudden you know what it looks like from the other side. So
I think they want to be technocrats.
Technocrats. Nice.
Bureaucrats, but I didn't coin that. That's around.
Nice.
Nice. Okay, let me go to. So we talked about Soul. I'm sorry. We talked about Hayek, who's clearly we talked about the knowledge problem, the Hayekian knowledge problem. You mentioned a little bit regarding prices. Prices contain a lot of information. There's an American economist that I like named Stephen Horowitz, who argues in one of his papers that prices allow us to act as if we knew what others knew.
Yeah.
They operate as knowledge surrogates.
Yeah.
So it's just one example from that, not from Hayek, not from Steve Horowitz, but actually from Murray Rothbard in his book, The Man, Economy, and State. He gives an example to articulate how prices hold lots of knowledge. He called it a platinum lined transcontinental